Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Property Law Alliance's Wednesday webinar. It's good to have you with us. It's been really scary, to say the least, times within South Africa, and that's over and above what we've already experienced with regard to COVID and the lockdowns that we've had to go through, the financial impact and burdens that have been placed on, on all of us as South Africans. But now, going into and seeing the visuals of the looting and the destruction of property that's been going on, it's really just a crazy time. But I think as it goes forward, and as you'll see within this webinar, I think it's very clear that there's a lot of uncertainty, which there always has been, but a lot of uncertainty around what's going to happen, with properties that have been damaged and the like. So we said that we would definitely be hosting the session to try and give some, a little bit of guidance or assistance to people who may have been impacted and affected by recent events within the country. It's good to have you, Solna, and Bruno with us. How are you guys doing? I hope that you're keeping safe. Solna?
Yes, thanks, Chris. I must say it's one of the saddest things that I think I've experienced. We're just coming through, the first wave, second wave, full lockdown, third wave, touching very close to home. I mean, losing friends, really seeing people struggling, getting sick, businesses being severely affected by COVID. Just in the past month, I had quite a few of my own team members sick and out, and it's really 2 weeks that somebody is out, and after that it takes quite some time to still recover and get back to where we were. And then this happened, and I'll be honest, on Monday I was completely freaked out. I almost want to use the term defeated, but obviously if we were defeated we wouldn't have been here right now. But it's sad, and I must say, positive me, I've just muted everybody on Facebook that posts negative stuff, and on my Facebook I just see the positive. People are starting to clean up. I think in Joburg specifically, we are starting to see clean up, and I'm starting to see more and more posts like, how do we help? How do we fix this? How do we get out of this? It's heartbreaking for me to see that it turned into a racial issue. But today I'm seeing, let's unite. Let's remember, this is South Africa. This is, people doing bad things, but we are South Africa and we can unite. So it's a very long, I don't know exactly how I'm doing, but I think I'm positive and I think I'm doing well. Thanks, Chris. How are you, though? You're in the midst of it right now. I'm safely in Joburg.
I'm in KZN, so it's crazy out there. But rather than focus on the negative, I think, like you're saying, we need to be positive. We've got a beautiful country. We've got beautiful people. And I think if we focus on rebuilding, it's only a matter of time before we get back to where we're supposed to be and then exceed that as well. Bruno, how are things on your end, man? How are you doing?
Oh, look, I mean, I have to echo what Solna's mentioning. The reality and the sadness behind it is the criminal element came out so quickly. I understand protests. I understand the sentiments behind everything. And I mean, for years, I always had these debates and these questions about, Zuma's influence on his following and their belief on him and whether it's justifiable. And there's a lot of good arguments to be made. I've had a lot of good conversations with people where they say, no, but you know what, media portrayed it in certain ways, and all of that is actually, we do need to encourage that sort of thinking. But there comes a time where, crossing that line between having a proper debate, getting your thoughts out there, protesting, and turning that into a criminal element. And that's the scary part, how quickly this turned. But echoing what Solna says, where you look at the silver lining is in certain areas, and I wish it was like this in all areas, but in certain areas, people saw the criminal element when realized that something was going wrong here, that this is not the way to do it. And it was very quickly put out. And it wasn't necessarily just because of Defense Force interference or SAPS. It was actually people going, no, I don't want to get involved in this. It's insane. It's an excuse and why. And I suppose that's where the problem comes in, is it did become racial and it did become criminal, and all of that does make me sad that, you know, we're still at that point where it turns so quickly, where the conversation, conversation isn't sparked, it's rather violence that's sparked. But with the bright side being that it also turned quickly back to where it should be. And that does make me happy that in some places the violence didn't persist.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, you know, the one thing was clear from the news images that we're seeing, for those of you that aren't in KZN or aren't in Rioting, you'd be bombarded with the news images of buildings and warehouses being burnt to the ground. So never mind the looting, it's also just the destruction of property. And these are businesses. These are businesses where undoubtedly there would have been rental agreements in place between landlords and lessees. And I want to ask you guys, I mean, and I'm sure there are probably lots of people who are affected by this with regard to maybe their businesses have been burnt down. What does this mean for rental agreements? I mean, where does one even start? There's no building there anymore. There's no business there anymore. So now, what would you advise on this?
Chris, it's amazing, because it wasn't a year ago that we had this conversation about impossibility of performance, and suddenly terms like vis major and causa fortuitus and things like that came up, and suddenly everybody knew about it. Everybody knew what it was. And the answer on that, you can't trade from your business because of the lockdown. So can you stop paying rent? And the answer was no. If your lease agreement has a clause that says, you know, you only in a situation of vis major or causa fortuitus impossibility of performance would the tenant be allowed to not pay rent. We all said, no, tenants, you still have your stuff there. You still have your business items in the premises. You're still supposed to be paying rent. This situation is sadly very different. And before I finish my full answer, I just want to say to every business owner that's been affected that I feel you on a whole new level. I think I've been crying for you more than what I've been crying for my own business during full lockdown last year. And my heart's breaking for you. And I've seen images of business owners sitting outside completely burnt down shops. And I think, sure, whether you have insurance or not right now, this is hard, and obviously people losing their jobs, but business owners specifically. And the good news is at least you don't have to pay rent anymore. If your shop, if the area which you've been renting has been destroyed, performance by the landlord becomes impossible. It's not impossible like it was in lockdown, like I couldn't get to my shop. The landlord can't allow you to occupy because there's nothing to occupy. It's been burned to the ground. In those situations, those lease agreements will automatically cancel because there isn't something to rent anymore. And in those situations, definitely no requirement to pay rent. But there's a very big but here. If you are trading from a shop and it's been looted, yes, you've suffered major damage and my heart breaks for you, but there is still a shop and you can still trade. In these circumstances, I fall back on my answer I had last year during full lockdown. Ubuntu, Ubuntu, Ubuntu. We need to now remember the landlord didn't just lose like that shop. He lost his entire building. It's been damaged. And yes, he probably has insurance, yes, for hoping, but the thing is that landlord can still perform. Partially so, and touch and go. Now it's going to fall back on the content of the lease agreement. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, and I'll leave Bruno to fill in the blanks that I left now. But in as far as full destruction of the property, the lease agreement automatically falls away. And the next question is going to be, what about my deposit? And that's going to be things that we're going to have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. So the lease agreement falls away. You don't have to pay rent anymore. But what you do with the deposit and how that deposit is treated will depend on the content of the lease agreement. So unfortunately there, I can't give a full answer because it's going to be case-by-case.
So yeah, look, I mean, I think you covered most of the aspects, because the most prominent question I've been receiving is obviously regarding the destruction, because a lot of the premises now cannot be utilized. So maybe just to touch on the impossibility, we do speak of like temporary impossibilities and basically permanent impossibilities, and the consequence. Or maybe let's take it one step back. So last year we were speaking about force majeure and supervening impossibility. These are all kind of thrown around. And at the end of the day, people kind of understood these concepts within the context of COVID. Now, force majeure is normally what you'd find written into the contract, right? So it's a certain event and the contract provides for what happens in case of that event. So first thing, and this is very important, guys, because it's not necessarily the case that if something happens to the premises that you're going to be able to get out the contract or even claim rent or remission, right? Force majeure clauses isn't simply a clause that goes, oh, force majeure, don't worry, nothing's going to happen. It's a carrying or allocation of risk. So you could have a force majeure clause that goes, okay, listen, so if this happens, sorry, nothing we can do. We still expect you to do A, B, and C. If the event lasts for a certain period of time, you're still going to be completely liable for rental payments or whatever the case is. So the contracts can in themselves offer that buffer. And sometimes that's problematic because as a tenant, when you first read this last year before COVID, you went, oh, who cares? Like, I don't care what this says. It doesn't matter. Then COVID hit and we all became very aware of it. But even with COVID, I think there were a lot shorter terms and we were worried more about rental remissions because, listen, it's a month. I can't get to the office. I just don't want to pay rent for that month. Now we're throwing a whole new problem into the mix where if properties are, if there's enough damage, or if, for example, your stock, like every single cent of your stock gets taken, you don't have insurance to cover it. That's terrifying because now you're sitting with a lease agreement that goes, yeah, well, you know, there's nothing that we can do about that. Even if the shop got damaged, nothing we can do. You need to keep paying rent because the contract says that you carry the risk. Same questions get asked me when it comes to sale of properties. What if there were any properties that were being sold and in the process of transfer? What happens now if those properties get damaged amidst this? And I keep telling everyone, it's not exactly what Solna says. There's no stock standard answer for this. Some contracts of sales say that on the date of signing, you take risk. Other contracts say that on the date of occupation, which might be before registration, you take risk. Other contracts say on date of registration, you take risk. That allocation of risk, and I think it comes down to that, it's allocation of risk. You guys need to check your contracts and see where does the risk lie. When the contract is silent, and so you go to, like, for example, in sale agreements, it says that risk will pass on, In lease agreements, you'd be looking for a force majeure clause that identifies what happens if there's an event that is neither party's fault. That's where you find your risk clause. If the contracts are completely silent on risk, there's the opportunity to look at the common law, and common law kind of applies as independently and fairly as possible and goes, okay, well, can rent still be paid? Yes. Is the object of the lease, if it's a lease, still available for letting? Yes or no? If not, if there's a partial destruction, for example, and you can only utilize part of the shop, then you would be entitled, in terms of common law, to a remission of a part of your rent. If the shop cannot be used at all, but can still be repaired, you'd be allowed to a remission of rent for the entire rent until the property, until the premises is repaired. If the property is permanently destroyed and there's no feasible way of getting it up and running again, that's the contract will lapse, because now it's permanently impossible. The contract cannot be executed on anymore, so that contract's done. And that's the common law, and that's typically when the contract is silent on that.
Thanks, Bruno. Thanks, Olna. The next question that I have is, well, it's not even a question, it's just me asking you guys on behalf of people out there. The financial toll that these kind of events, undoubtedly are going to or had already, it's immense. And insurance companies are undoubtedly going to have their hands extremely full at this point in time. But with that being said, there are going to be stories where people come out and say that they're either one, insured, or two, not insured. I wanted to find out from you guys, do insurance companies cover this kind of, these kind of happenings, lootings, riots, and that? So your normal general business insurance, does it cover it? And then secondly, what happens where a tenant and or a landlord is not insured? Is there any light at the end of this extremely dark tunnel for these people? I'm not sure, if Bruno, if you want to get to this one first, or still not, open to both of you.
Sure.
You can start, Bruno.
Cool, no worries. So look, insurance is quite it's a field of law on its own, right? So it does carry a certain amount of complexities. Within the property space, you typically find a common types of insurances. So you've got your property or house like a property insurance or household insurance. So that's not necessarily the contents of the house. It's more about the property or house itself, right? You'll find that the banks often make you take out this insurance policy, because if the property burns down, the banks will actually get you to insure the property, not for the value of the property, but for the amount of money it's going to take to build the property back to where it was at that moment, right? So they insure you for like whatever million rand over what you bought it for, 500,000 rand over. So that's homeowners insurance, that you typically find property insurance. You get that on commercial properties as well. Those ones, if memory serves me correct, typically include SASRIA automatically. So it's not one of those opt-in, opt-out things like your short-term vehicle insurance, because there you can tick the box and, for extra 6 rand, they'll cover you for rioting. I bet you, you wish you had paid that 6 rand now. But yeah, so for the bigger properties, for immovable properties, it is typically included in your insurance policy. From a business perspective, though, in a business interruption insurance, so that's something else, and we're going to need to see what happens now, because remember, the contracts are drafted very specifically, right? Again, it's contractual, so that's what people need to remember. There's no set answer. Even different insurance companies may have different policies and different exclusions. So now we need to be careful on how it's worded, because there might be certain exclusions based on the type of right, or whatever it might be. But I'm not going to say I'm fairly confident to say that riots are generally included in most insurance policies. So it's with business interruption. COVID, I can see how people tried to get out of it. And there was a lot of exclusions and arguments that technically it wasn't included. And, it wasn't caused by COVID directly. So, but riots is a bit more of a direct, causal link between what happened and your loss. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the insurance companies would probably cover it. But, we're yet to see. There's probably going to be case law and stuff like that out there. One thing that I need to warn people over is, it does get to a point sometimes where certain exclusions start kicking in. So you guys need to be careful. If you have, let's say, homeowners insurance over your property, and it specifically says there that you can't have more than a couple of people on the property itself, otherwise the insurance company doesn't want to cover certain events from happening. Be careful with that, because a lot of them have taken certain risk profiles into account. And if you've packed your property with a whole bunch of people, and this just kind of opened it up to this type of riot or looting or people coming in and out and damaging the property, you may find that the insurance company will come in there and say, well, we did say that we would only permit 2 dwellings with 2 families living on the property. And I've seen this in a lot of policies where they're specific. And if they find a reason to connect the fact that you did something contrary to that policy, that could very likely have resulted in the damage to the property, they might refuse to pay out. So just be very careful with that. Check your policies and just make sure that you are covered for the type of business that you're running on a property. If it is just a buy to let or multi-let, how many people do you have there? Are you actually insured for that? Are you allowed to be doing that? Because now I'm not even worried about zoning. Now I'm actually just speaking about insurance policies and whether you're covered or not.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bruno. You gave me a good giggle on your very lawyery answer there, where you wanted to say, I'm quite confident we can, and then you were like, quite good. And that's such a lawyery thing, but I understand why you're doing it, and I think that's why it's so important to latch onto that one and say the problem with things like this is all the rules are out there. We know the law, we know the rules, and suddenly something like this happens. I mean, if somebody told me this story a year ago, I would have been like, oh, please just get out of your own head. There's no way this is going to happen. To be quite honest, my business partner told me a story today that his friend got bitten by a shark in Jeffreys. So also speedy recovery to dude, I don't know. But we're hearing the weirdest stuff. Like I'm throwing the shark story in, not because it's a property story, because the world right now is so bizarre. If somebody tells me today that there's like something weird happening somewhere, I'm just never again going to think, no, man, that won't ever happen. My point with this story is, as much as we think these things won't happen, unfortunately, it means we skim a little on insurance, to your point, Bruno. And way back when, you guys might not know this, but I was actually a financial planner with Old Mutual way back when, good times. So I went through the short-term insurance training and exactly this SASRIA stuff. I know I was horrible. Okay, I can't sell life cover, but so it's a very sad situation, because your typical property owner, not property owner, shop owner, your typical business owner right now, the shop that he's owning, the guy with the cell phone, sort of shop in Alexandra Mall. This is not necessarily somebody that had, full insurance on all his stock. And that is the person that my heart is breaking for right now, because you were scraping by because of the financial impact of COVID and the lockdown on the past year. And unfortunately, stock that was not insured, you won't have a claim for that against the landlord. Most of these retail agreements will contain a clause that says the landlord should provide the mall or the stores or whatever to be open. So there's always a bit of an agreement in retail agreements that requires the landlord to provide certain marketing, basically getting feet in your door. Where in this case, it's impossible for the landlord. So you won't have a claim against the landlord for any losses suffered as a result of this, because in fairness, this was really not the landlord's doing. The landlord, the mall owners right now, I mean, what they couldn't have done anything. So that's the sad reality of what we are currently seeing. Luckily, the impact on residential is obviously much less. The impact on weird, not funny, but that last year mid-lockdown, the impact was basically exclusively on residential. We had obviously impact on business, but the main thing centered around residential property, where now we're talking retail property. And I think it's just a very sad situation that we are currently in. And unfortunately, like I said, the shop owner right now without insurance on his stock would not have a claim against the landlord either.
Sure. I think I was also wanted to find out from you guys. I mean, we're saying, the financial and economic ramification of this activity or this criminality is going to be immense. That obviously will have an effect, and has already had an effect on people's job security. The fact is that if your business is no longer there, you can't employ people anymore. You won't have a job to go to. If your business is there and already been severely impacted by, like Silva, you were referring to, the lockdown and certain restraints on trade and so forth, it might lead to job losses in the very near future. We hope not, yes. But it just might. The question that I have then is with regard to one's contractual obligations. Should you have entered into a rental agreement and then subsequently lost your job? Should you have entered into lending agreements? I mean, there's a lot of business owners out there who had, taken out loans to get them through these difficult periods. If you now have lost that income that you were relying on to, furnish or to pay these loans and make these monthly repayments, is there going to be a bit of a break for one, for I don't know, a tenant, for business owners paying a loan, for anybody that matter who has some sort of contractual obligation? Silva?
Sure, Chris. I was hoping you throw that one to Bruno because I know the answer, but I don't want to say it. I can't see.
Yeah, I'm the bad news guy. Then Silva will speak about Ubuntu. That's how it works, Chris.
Chris,
that's why I agree with Silva,
exactly. Chris floored me completely. I was ready with my Ubuntu.
So today I'm doing Ubuntu, and Silva's giving the bad news.
Let's see if we can. Just because we dressed alike doesn't mean we can't swap on conversations. Unfortunately, I can't see that there can be any further rent reduction. I mean, why we had the rent recovery agreements and things like that it was a temporary thing. Where lockdown at that time, remember good times when we thought it's only gonna be 3 weeks. 18 months later, we're like, yay, that's the longest 3 weeks I've ever seen in my life. But good times. So the thing is, at that stage, it was a temporary thing. To Bruno's point of earlier, your impossibility of performance or your struggle to perform was a temporary thing. Unfortunately, if you've lost your job, it means it's probably you're not necessarily going to be able to secure a new position in 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 months. And that's the sad reality. And to make matters worse, I can't see that government has any funds left. I don't want to speak on behalf of the government, but I can't see after all the TERS payments and the current still TERS payments that's being made, that there is much more funds for relief at this very stage. And the thing that breaks my heart is what sparked all of this was the action that we all wanted to see. We want to feel and see justice being done in whichever form, and I'm seriously not meaning to talk politics. I'm not silly enough for that one. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is the result of, I really hope and do believe, healing. And unfortunately, to heal something, you probably just need to get out all the crap underneath, and then we can clean it up, and then we can heal. And I think that is the pain that we are currently feeling. I think we're feeling the pain of cleanup, and it's a sad reality. But look at me sneaking in my positivity in my sad answer. Bruno, check this one. I think we're feeling the pain of healing. I think we're feeling the pain of cleaning up, but it means the government doesn't have money to support. I don't know if we're going to see some financial support. I haven't heard a thing, so I unfortunately doubt it. So for the residential or the retail tenant or wherever else, industrial, commercial, whatever the case might be, if you do not have money to pay rent, now my advice would be, do not wait. It's the 14th of the month. We have 2 weeks to talk to landlords. Landlords, you have 2 weeks to talk to your tenants. Do not sit and, have your eyes completely stuck on ENCA and scroll through Facebook frantically to try and feel better. Now is the moment to pick up the phone, talk to each other, I snuck in my own Ubuntu. Talk to each other, see how we can help each other. Now is not a time to try and squeeze your last cent out. Now is the time to say, okay, this is a massive, for lack of a better word, gemors, nee? So let's help each other. But unfortunately, I can't see any rent reduction or support there. Bruno?
So Silva just stole the whole answer. Left nothing.
I couldn't leave it that
something.
bad.
I'll find something. Okay, so yeah, no obligation on landlords or creditors or anyone to grant any indulgences. There was never actually any obligation. I mean, in our law, a contract's a contract. So unless vis majeure applies, it's not something you can compel, right? So any indulgences you got the last time was in, good nature. And Silna often speaks about Ubuntu, right? So now we're looking at a new scenario. We're looking at new circumstances, and we're trying to see, well, what's going to happen here? We do need, and maybe this is just what I'll add to what Silna is saying. So her focus is, guys, speak to each other, like start making plans. What I saw during COVID, and what I think I need to emphasize is, don't go out and try and exploit things now, because during COVID, a lot of people started doing that, where it's like, oh, okay, well, they're getting indulgences here. Let's just go and get it. And even though not everyone actually needed it, and that is why the coffers dried up. That is why we can't expect now to be receiving more indulgences from landlords. I mean, the commercial landlords, all the guys that I've spoken to, all my clients, when you approach them and you're like, all right, great, well, how are you handling this? They're like, well, I can't do anything else, because last year when COVID hit, we went on a massive, just don't worry, you don't pay a cent, you're on 75%, you're on 20%, and they made massive reductions. And then as time went by, some of those businesses never recovered. So not only did they reduce the rent, but then they lost tenants. So now if you look at half the buildings out there, they're half empty, because now with COVID, everyone's working remotely. Leases that terminated, I mean, no one's going back to premises. They're not renewing leases. So that's out the picture as well. So now you've got commercial landlords with empty premises, with existing tenants that are now saying, please give me relief. They might seem like the big, bad, rich guys, but remember, these big, bad, rich guys go bankrupt just like everyone, just like this. And so they might seem big because they listed, and you might find them on the JSC, or you read articles about them. That doesn't make them financially secure. And I'm not trying to say here, oh, but shame, the poor landlord. What I'm trying to say is, we're at that point now where it's going to be difficult all around, where that that olive branch is going to be a little bit hard on everyone's part. And that's why don't exploit, rather let's be honest, let's see what can get done, let's see what arrangements can be reached. I think now is the time for creative thinking. What can we do? Where can we make money? Maybe there's an upside to a landlord if he's willing to indulge something, and the landlord's willing to. Maybe there's something that can be done, as long as we don't exploit it, because there is no obligation at the moment to grant any indulgences on contracts, and that's the hard truth.
Sure. No, thank you, guys. I think we've come to the end of tonight's webinar. I hope that it's been informative, and I know it's definitely been informative for me, for a lot of our viewers out there. Should you have any questions that maybe you watch this at a later point and you have any specific questions, please feel free to get in touch with us on the Property Law Alliance page as well. You can drop your questions there. But on the Property Law Alliance group, I think we're going to be here for a while, so please drop your questions here. I urge all of you to remain safe and to remember that COVID is still with us. So when you're going out and you're doing your buyings for the month or for the week, please think about the fact that COVID is still around. And if you're out patrolling, I know a lot of people are out there patrolling their communities and protecting their families. Please, I ask you to do so responsibly and to be safe and to act within the confines of the law. And yeah, stay safe, and we'll see you all next week at 6 o'clock. Thank you, Solna. Thank you, Bruno. Cheers, guys.